Щоб приймали волі, гоньки наші, Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back today at 4:48 of the news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And tonight we have massive news. It is great news, actually. We heard that the Ukrainians have been able to make it to Klishkivka, and they have actually liberated the town, according to Prigozhin himself. We're going to be covering that later on tonight. That is probably the largest frontline advance we've seen for over the past 4 months from either side, past 5 months really from either side. And it is an amazing night of news because not only did that happen, things have been happening all over. And so, before we get into the funnest thing of the night, which will be the liberation of Klishkivka, we're going to be moving on into the appetizers first. And so we're going to be moving on to Moscow, and specifically a small town on the outskirt of Moscow's farthest out ring road called Dmitrov, where we saw an unknown drone flying over the town. This caused a massive stir, especially considering what happened at the Kremlin. And we see it flying right over that building right up there. And there it is one more time. We can't really tell what that thing is, but apparently it was not a Russian armed forces drone, and so it caused a massive panic. We don't know what happened to the drone after this video, but we did know that the panic was severe, to say the least. And so very nice to see that whoever was flying the drone was able to cause the entire Russian army in the area to go into absolute disarray. We're now going to be moving on from Russia, because funnily enough, that's all the Russian news we had. And we're now going to be moving on to Kyiv. We did get a report, and we are going to be finally rounding out that story of the Patriot missile defense system, or the battery that was supposedly attacked and the Russians declared destroyed. The Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, came out with a statement today declaring that the Patriot had only sustained incredibly minor damage, almost to the point that it was superficial. And apparently it also did not affect the radar component of the Patriot battery, nor the generators. And so, for the large part, this Patriot battery is completely functional. It may have been one of the launchers, like we were supposing the other day, that may have been slightly damaged by maybe shrapnel or debris from a building that was hit. So it seems as though this Patriot battery is not out of the action whatsoever. It is still in the fight, and it's still active around the Kyiv area. And so it is good to know, finally, from the Department of Defense, that this Patriot defense system is still online and still operational. And it's very good to know that an entire $1 billion surface-to-air missile defense system didn't go offline due to one good hit. And so with that, great news to round out that little story with, because for a while people were pretty concerned, and to be honest, behind the scenes we were a little concerned as well, because we didn't have any official statements or any picture or video evidence to really back up what happened to it, and it was a pretty fair notion that it may have been significantly damaged, or at least a serious critical component of the battery may have been damaged. But the Department of Defense has come out and said that there was no serious damage, only very minor damage to one of the less important parts of the battery, which is most likely one of the launchers, and that was the end of that story, which is a great way to round that one out. We're now going to be moving on into the location unknowns already. We've already made it all the way around full circle into the location unknowns, and there's a very small amount of them tonight, but nonetheless, they are top-notch quality. Starting off, we can see the Ukrainians firing from a makeshift turret. This is something that we've actually seen a little while ago. It is a twin RPG launcher. It is kind of set up...
That's pretty nice.
It's pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. This thing is kind of set up like an SPG-9, but double-barreled. So let me show y'all an SPG-9, just to kind of give y'all an idea of what I mean by that. So here you can see an SPG-9. It's a recoilless gun that is used by really everyone in Ukraine, both the Russians and the Ukrainians. And it seems as though they may have taken the tripod that was used for the SPG-9 and rigged a additional mount to be able to take 2 RPGs and then remotely fire them after adjusting their aim. So a very interesting little system. I think we've only seen one of these, and this is the only one that's in existence. But the Ukrainians that made this were pretty ingenuitive when coming up with this thing. But here's the clip of it in operation. When you see them firing the first RPG, we now see them firing it again and again. We now see them going up and reloading the dual-wielded RPG. That is a really cool idea. And
That's wild. He's kind of standing like underneath it almost when he's firing it off.
Yeah, you know, I was looking at that too. I wasn't going to say anything about it, but that is pretty wild. He's like maybe 4 feet away and right below it. And usually, well, then again, the backblast is back there, so I guess being in front of it may be the best place to be around this thing. But still, a very interesting little system that these Ukrainian soldiers came up with just out of random on the front lines. I'm guessing that they're doing this so that way their RPG fire is more accurate. You do have to remember that RPGs, much like a rifle, have to be aimed manually most of the time because it is a man-portable rocket launcher. And so it seems as though they put these 2 RPGs on a mount so that way they could precisely adjust the fire and get far more accurate results with their RPGs at much farther ranges. That may be the reason why they've made this thing, and it's a very ingenious creation as well. With that, we're going to be moving on into our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Russian trench. These kinds of videos are very few and far in between when it comes from the Russian forces. We got to see unfiltered video of what Russian soldiers live like on the front lines. And I'm not even kidding. This isn't like a build up to a joke or anything. It really just shows what Russian soldiers live like on the front lines. And shockingly enough, it involves a massive amount of booze, an unbelievable amount of booze. And so here's the clip. We can hear them playing rap. And when you see this guy looking through his Spotify, we can see all the Russian soldiers come up that look like they've had fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm not going to lie, they kind of all do. And we just got this random guy. And here he is, he's passing out liquor. As usual, as you would expect, so that way everyone can continue on the saga of just being absolutely plastered.
I'm just saying that really doesn't sound like American rap, though, in the background.
It does. It sounds like 90s rap. And I don't listen to rap a lot, but that sounds like 1990s kind of rap. And you know, wait a minute, hang on. This right here, the way this guy is standing, you can tell he is drunk already. And you can already see that he's holding a little shot glass right there. All of these guys are drunk. They're actually on the front lines right now, by the way. This is the Russian fortification near a largely quiet part of the front. And of course, as usual, completely plastered already. When you see another guy coming out, he's got a vodka shot too. Everybody's drinking. Like, nobody is sober here.
Леня, привет.
Wait a minute, hold up, wait a minute. Was that a monster?
Maybe?
Nope, it wasn't. It was very close.
It's a Flex.
It's the Russian ripoff monster, Flex. Odd flex, but okay. And also, I like how their food variety down here, Matthew, are pickles and some, like, carnitas. It looks like carnitas over there in the corner.
It does. I like how the trash song in the background is saying, "What can I do? What can I do?" It's like, you can go home and give up.
Man, I gotta tell you this. A raw, unfiltered look at Russian positions, you can tell why these guys are losing the war because not a single person in this video was sober. Like, where they would be mentally coherent if a firefight started. None of them even know where they are right now, really. But that is one of the few videos that we've ever been able to get that was a raw, unfiltered video from the Russian army of what their life is like. Not made by a Russian state television show or anything like that. It is just a raw, unfiltered video from a Russian soldier of their life on the front lines. And of course, while it seems that everything else is scarce, including proper uniforms, because these guys are just dressed up like whatever, the vodka still flows. And it blows me away that out of everything that they care about, in the middle of possibly getting killed here soon, because that's a very relevant reality for the Russians, the only thing they care about is how are they going to get absolutely knock-over drunk again. And it's unbelievable to see. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to what being dog drunk like that results in if your whole army's like that, which is the loss report for the past 24 hours. And y'all wouldn't believe it, they finally passed 200,000 Russian soldiers wiped out.
7 Bobcats gone in a day. They're climbing those numbers right back up there again.
They just lost their 200,000th guy. Matthew's like, dang, look at the Bobcats. But
It's a hell of a day.
it's a hell of a day in every single way. I mean, not in any category was it under expectations. 7 Bobcat skid steers, or special equipment vehicles, of course, were destroyed over the past 24 hours, which is an unbelievably massive number. Probably one of the highest that we have seen, getting on up towards the top. But moving on from the Bobcats, because while we usually keep up that joke, today is a very significant day just in the infantry casualties alone. They lost another 610 Russian soldiers, which means that they have now officially lost 200,000 Russian soldiers. Just to give you a little bit of context, it took them 10 months to reach the first 100,000 Russian soldiers killed, and they reached that number around the 22nd of December in 2022. It only took them 5 more months to reach 200,000. They lost the same number of people that they lost in the first 10 months of the war in 5 months. And we can see that this is certainly starting to weigh heavily on Russian forces, like in the area of Bakhmut, where we can see that there is really no fighting will in the Russian army anymore. They've largely been replaced by conscripts. They don't have any tanks. They don't have trained crews to operate these older tanks that they're even bringing to the front. This number right here stands testament to how badly the Russians are really doing in this war, is that they have officially surpassed 200,000 soldiers killed. And this is, by far, the bloodiest war that the successor of the Soviet Union has ever fought since the Second World War. Moving on from that, they also lost an unbelievable 17 armored personnel carriers. One of the, if not the highest number that we've seen since the new year. 17 armored personnel carriers in a single day is incredibly high, and is nearly 2/3 of an entire battalion tactical group's worth of armored personnel carriers destroyed in 24 hours. Not only that, they lost 19 supply trucks, also one of the higher numbers that we've seen in this category since this year. 19 supply trucks. And remember, a supply truck, at least the Ural 4320, can carry anywhere around 8 to 10 tons of supplies. And that means that just in the raw metrics alone, around 1,900 tons of supplies today, if these trucks were fully laden, were completely destroyed in 24 hours. A massive amount of supplies. 9 main battle tanks were destroyed. That is probably the highest number we've also seen since the beginning of the new year. It is an incredibly high number, considering that each tank costs around $3.5 million on average. They've lost nearly $35 million worth of tanks in just a single day. On top of that, they lost another 16 artillery pieces. The Russian artillery at this point is hemorrhaging losses, and it appears that they're not going to be stopping anytime soon. Ukrainian counter battery has gotten very effective and is destroying the litany of any kind of artillery that the Russians have, whether it be light mortars or heavy artillery. They're destroying it all at a very consistent rate. The Ukrainians also shot down 16 drones. They shot down 9 cruise missiles. Those include the Kinzhal missiles that were shot down over Kyiv. They're updating those numbers as of today, although that happened yesterday. And then 2 anti-aircraft warfare vehicles were destroyed. And once again, I don't have to remind y'all how much in cost that is. That is $30 million alone in anti-aircraft systems that have been destroyed. And of course, the 7 special equipment vehicles. All in all, the 17th of May has proved to be an absolute butchery of the Russian army as far as they are concerned on their own level. They've lost a large amount of armor, they've lost a large amount of APCs, a decent supply capacity, or a decent amount of supplies just straight out of a supply depot. They've also lost vital anti-aircraft systems that they can't replace. They've lost a decent amount of special equipment vehicles that may help them to fortify once the Ukrainians really start to push them back in the Bakhmut area rather quickly. They've lost a large amount of stuff today. It's an unbelievable amount. These losses truly show that the Russians are not recovering at this point in the war. And once we get to the Klishchiivka area or the Bakhmut area, y'all will see that it's bad. We actually had a video today of what I would say, when I saw the video, I'd estimate at least 100 to 200 Russian soldiers on film just pouring down a dirt road just east of Klishchiivka in a complete rout. They are not even returning from the field. They're running right off the field and never coming back. And it's a horrendous situation right now today for the Russians. It's a great day for the Ukrainians, however, because they were able to cover nearly, from what we guesstimate, around 5 miles of ground south of Bakhmut, and they also routed the 72nd, like I was just saying. So it's been an amazing day for the Ukrainians, but as you can see here, just the losses alone, it's been a terrible day for the Russians, and that's not even getting into the amount of ground they've lost. With that, we're going to be moving on from the location unknowns, and we're not going to be moving into our question segment just yet. We're actually going to be moving into Luhansk real quick, where another fire was spotted, but we haven't gotten a lot of information about this one. We don't know if this was another Storm Shadow strike, considering that that is really the only weapon the Ukrainians have that can reach this far, rather than a Grom or a Hrem. The Grom or the Hrem are the exact same missile, it's just a different name for the same missile. But we can see smoke billowing from a high-rise right here, but over here in this clip, it appeared to be from another part of the city. And then right here, we can see another fire raging once again. We don't know what this was specifically that was hit. We don't even know if the Ukrainians really did hit this. This may have also been a partisan attack. We're not entirely sure. But something is burning prolifically within the Luhansk city area. And once again, showing that the city of Luhansk, the farthest back city and pretty much the Russian headquarters of the military effort inside of Ukraine, it's not safe either. It is also prone to attack, whether it be by partisan or the Ukrainian army itself. With that, we're now going to be moving on from Luhansk and on into the area of Sevastopol, where we got a little bit of satellite imagery that was fairly interesting to see. And we got to see the submarines in the open. Now, many of y'all may know that usually submarine pens are constructed for subs that are in operation. Usually in the United States, submarines just don't really sit out in the wide open everywhere. They do in a decent amount of places, but there are purpose-built submarine pens to try and hold some of the submarines and keep them far safer from aerial bombardment. This isn't the case for the Russians, and as we can see right here, we saw that 2 Kiloclass submarines are at the moorings in the Sevastopol port, and it appears that they're being loaded up with a special barge with caliber missiles. It appears that these will be heading out to sea very soon, and will probably be a part of an oncoming missile attack, probably within the next 2 or 3 days against Ukraine. Now, considering that we've seen these Kiloclass submarines in operation multiple times before, and being used to direct missile attacks against Ukraine, we have a pretty good idea where these Kilo-class submarines will be launching their missiles. Usually, whenever missiles are launched from the Black Sea, they're not intended for the eastern part of Ukraine. Those are usually land-launched or air-launched from inside of Russian airspace or Russian territory. The ones launched in the Black Sea are usually targeting far west into Ukraine. Think the areas of Chernivtsi, Lviv, Chernopil, Ivano-Frankivsk, areas like that are most likely going to be the target of these Kilo-class submarines. And real quick, I actually have to adjust my number. There's 3 of them. There's one right there. And it's very hard to see because Kilo-class submarines are black, and the water in Sevastopol port is pretty dark in color, so it's really hard to differentiate the sub from the water. But you can see one right there, a second one right there, and then the third one here. You can also see the loading barge, or the floating crane as they call it, right down here, and it appears that it's loading up that Kilo-class submarine when this satellite image was taken. We also know where this picture was taken. If we go down to Sevastopol port, there are a few places that the Russian Navy uses. This is one of them, and I believe what we were looking at, and let me make sure that I find the correct spot, was this mooring right here. And I had to make sure that we did get the correct one. It is this one. And so the Kilo-class submarines were lined up around here. I don't see the floating barge, so unfortunately I can't show you where that one is usually moored, but that's where the submarines were. And considering that we got a really good idea of where they're bringing their submarines, apparently, to load them up with caliber missiles, the Ukrainians may find it imperative to try and either damage these moorings or the port facilities nearby, the floating crane that's loading up these caliber missiles onto the submarine, or destroy the submarines outright themselves while they're in these moorings. The port of Sevastopol is a little too shallow, especially in these inlets, for the submarines to dive, and in fact, they really can't dive in a mooring even if it was deep enough, because the crew most likely wouldn't be on board and ready to dive the submarine. On top of that, it does take a little bit of time, and by the time they detect the missile, it probably would be hitting it before it could even completely submerge. And so these submarines are in a very precarious spot, and it is good to know that we know exactly where they're loading up these submarines. Kilo-class submarines as well, and I have to kind of go down a whole breakdown of the Kilo-class submarine here, is kind of the modern-day backbone of the Russian submarine fleet. It is a diesel-electric attack submarine, which is really interesting because diesel-electric submarines are not as stealthy as nuclear submarines. They actually produce a decent amount of noise unless they're under battery power. And, you know, and of course, Well, some people say, well, yeah, but when they're under battery power, they're quiet. They're more quiet than a nuclear submarine. The issue with that, however, is that modern nuclear submarines like ours here in the United States, like, for example, the Seawolf class, which there's only 3 of those can pick up the sound of a diesel submarine from hundreds of miles away, well out of the range that this submarine could figure out that it was being listened to. And so by the time this thing turned on its electric batteries and started to operate in, I guess you could say, ultra quiet mode, a submarine would already know where this thing is and would have a fairly good idea. And so it wouldn't really make that much of a difference, at least as far as the Kilo-class submarines are concerned. But very interesting to see that once again they're loading them up, and we will probably be expecting in a few days to see these submarines out in the Black Sea firing off these calibers. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news in Sevastopol and on towards the area of Odessa. We got a very short video from the port of Odessa today showing that the Russians had apparently attacked the city quite heavily and it was hit badly. We don't know exactly the damage that has been caused, but we can see 2 massive explosions coming from what appears to be the port area of the city. And we don't know the kind of damage that was caused. Once again, we don't know if there were any injuries or fatalities, or if anything serious in, I guess you could say, strategic value was lost or damaged. But we do have a small video showing that the Russians somehow were able to hit the city of Odessa. We also don't know what kind of munitions were used. And so it could be Shaheeds, it could be missiles, it could be anything. We're not entirely sure. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that little bit of news as well, and on up into our frontline news. Starting in the northeast, where we have almost no news because it's a largely inactive part of the front, and then moving on down into Bakhmut, and talking about the complete rout that has happened there over the past around really 24 to 12 hours. But before we get into any of this frontline news, which is the real juice of the night, we have to address the polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and it is poll time, and our very first poll says, Russia has seized Finland's consulate and embassy bank accounts, and what are your thoughts? 75% said not good, Russia has started stealing money from Finland, 8% said unsure, 9% said it's probably not major, and 8% said it's not a big deal at all. And I would be with the 75%. I think that is not good. It's probably because Russia is facing some extreme financial difficulty in their country right now, and they're trying to find new pools of money to siphon to be able to keep themselves afloat. I really doubt there's a legitimate reason. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. So, they're trying to steal some money to stay afloat. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that they are getting desperate for cash at this point, because obviously a consulate's account isn't going to have any more than probably a few $1 million inside of it. And of course, that is massive to all of us, but in a governmental scale, that is minute. That's practically worthless. And it shows that the Russians must be getting dirt poor to go and start seizing accounts like that and trying to take the money out of them, because they're just trying to find a way to get another Russian a sleeping bag or something for $4 on wish.com. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. And we are on to and also real quick before we move on to that, when I see a lot of people talking about the diesel submarines versus the nuclear ones, and a lot of people are talking about an Australian submarine that during a war game was actually able to sink an American aircraft carrier. One thing I would like to say is that is true. That is actually a true story, but it is largely a fluke. And based off of what we know, that was like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. That captain of that Australian submarine was just an incredibly good submariner and got incredibly lucky and was able to pass right through the defensive nets. I guess you could say the defensive barrier made around the carrier with the task group. It's not a normal thing, and on top of that, a diesel-electric submarine can only operate underwater with its electric battery for so long, and it's not an incredibly long amount of time. They have to snorkel, and when they snorkel, that means that the sub pretty much has to surface and run off of its diesel engines, so that way the battery can recharge, so that way, once again, it can submerge and then start to operate in far quieter mode than a nuclear submarine could. It's not as good as a nuclear submarine, though, in all honesty, and it's not as advanced. That's why you see that whenever a country can afford it or has the ability to do it, they always produce nuclear submarines instead of diesel-electric, because diesel-electric has a whole bunch of shortcomings to it, and on top of that, diesel-electric submarines largely have to stay surfaced instead of submerged because they can only operate underwater for so long before the battery charge runs out, and then they have to snorkel so that way the diesel engines can run and they can recharge those batteries. So there are some inherent shortcomings to those kinds of submarines, and while they are quieter, they can only be quieter for so short of a time before they become completely visible to the entire world when they submerge again.
And so, real quick, I see some folks asking, was it a Norwegian sub or a Swedish one?
I think I think I got it wrong about the Australian sub. I think it was actually a Swedish sub. But the story still largely stands. The diesel-electric subs, while quieter for a very short amount of time, they're not quiet forever, and they're not better than a nuclear submarine. That's why you see all, I guess you could say, like, just to put it out there in the plainest terms possible, that's why you see poorer countries like Russia in the modern world trying to field as many diesel-electric submarines as possible as compared to nuclear, because nuclear submarines are far more expensive, and while they're more expensive, they come with a whole lot of extra perks, and they are far better than a diesel-electric submarine could ever plan on being. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Sorry, though. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, independent, with quotation marks around it, Russian media claims that Kremlin officials are forbidden to resign, and what are your thoughts? 79% said I believe it, and they cannot resign. 10% said unsure. 4% said, I'm kind of mixed on this one. And 8% said I don't buy it, and they can resign. And I personally strongly doubt that anyone in the Russian government can simply just quit, because it works like the mob, essentially. It's a criminal organization, and you can't simply walk away from that, or you're going to fall out of a window. You can walk out of a window, but you can't walk onto the ground. So I don't think they can resign. Not a chance. But Enforcer, what say you?
Oh, no, they can't resign. If they resign, that would be a bad look for the Russian government, and then them and their family would be whacked somewhere, like in Mexico, for all anyone cares. So I would say, no, they probably can't resign, and that's probably a true statement. That probably was a standing rule, though, even before the war, because imagine someone resigning and showing that they disagree with Putin. Imagine how much of an embarrassment that would be to the Russian government. So I'm sure that's been a rule on the book forever, is that you can't resign. You can only be removed from your position once you get it. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our third poll says the developers of the Russian Kinzhal missile are arrested for treason and facing life sentences, and what are your thoughts? And first, a little context. Some of these folks were arrested last year, and there has been one arrested in April, which is the most recent. So they haven't been arrested as of today. So I don't want to be any misunderstandings on that. But they have changed the sentence to a life sentence. So that's a pretty big change. That is actually one of the most severe punishments you can get in Russia, except for falling out of a window outside the court system. But it looks like 79% said they are Russia's new scapegoat, 5% said unsure, 13% said I need more details first, and 3% said they actually acted criminally. And I seriously doubt they acted in a criminal fashion. They designed this missile. Russia has seen it get destroyed. They've seen some design flaws in it, and now they found themselves a new scapegoat. So they're going to pay the price for that instead of it looking like Putin made a mistake. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's pretty funny to hear that, because that shows that it is nothing but hype and propaganda, and that's what we've seen consistently from the Russians. To try and summarize it as best I can, they have an amazing propaganda department. Nobody can really contest that. And while we hate the Russians, I can say this: they were able to fool the world for decades on end to think that they're far more competent and capable with their military than they ever really could be in practice. That is one thing they were able to do amazingly, even down to the technology of individual weapons like the T-14 Armada, the Su-57 Felon, and now the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. They've been able to do that well. The problem is that whenever they actually get these things out onto the field, there was so much corruption and, I guess you could say, shortcuts made in the development and design of these weapons that they never work. They never work the way they're supposed to, and it's been seen since the Russian Federation was founded. Only a few things have succeeded, like the Ka-50s. That's like really the only thing that the Russian Federation actually made within their, I guess you could say, history, after 1991, that actually worked. And it's really because this was largely developed while they were the Soviet Union, and they could rely on pretty much the manpower of 15% of the world, or the brain power of 15% of the world, to try and come up with this thing. But once they started to try and develop programs on their own, like the T-14 Armada or the Kinzhal, things just fall apart. Like with the T-14, which is another great example, a lot like the Kinzel, this thing will never see combat. We're very certain on that at this point. Everyone's certain on that around the world. This thing has so many problems. It's just impossible to bring it into a war. The engines don't really work. The engines were poorly made. They never upgraded the gun. The gun was actually supposed to be upgraded from around 125 millimeter to 150 millimeter main gun. They never were able to do that due to a whole bunch of shortcomings and industry failings in trying to create a larger caliber gun for this tank. They just haven't been able to do anything. And the Kinzel is just a continuation of that. And once you really look at a Kinzel missile, and let me go to one, and you see it up close, you sit there and go, that is just an Iskander. I mean, it is literally just an Iskander, the same body and everything. And so let me show you all an Iskander. So let me go to the images here. And also, some of you all may be going, well, this thing looks larger. The aircraft are deceptively large, and so while this looks small on the MiG-31, these are the exact same size. And so it's pretty crazy to see. This thing is literally just the exact same as an Iskander. The only thing that's changed on it are the, I guess you could say, the stabilizer fins on the bottom of the fuselage of the missile. That's the only thing that's been changed, but beyond that, the body shape is exactly the same. It's bizarre to see that they failed at this so badly that they're getting shot down.
Is it the same size, though?
From what I understand, they are the same size. Let me make sure and check. Because
that truck looks awfully long, and that aircraft can't be much longer than the truck.
So let's see here. Let me go down here. Guidance system, engine. The length is 24 feet. So let's go look at the length of a Kinzel. And the length is 23 feet and 7 inches. So they are the exact same length.
Oh, that's kind of weird. It's like an optical illusion then.
Yeah, it's really weird because the crazy thing is that you never think about it until you see them side by side. Aircraft dwarf every single kind of vehicle on the ground, and the MiG-31 is actually a monster of a plane. The thing's the size of a bomber, pretty much. And I'll show you that real quick because I'm sure this will be mind-blowing to a lot of people who've never really looked at the scale of aircraft. So let me go down here to the specs and let me get to the length of this thing. So a MiG-31 is 74 feet long. That's huge. And to put that into context, a B-17 Flying Fortress, which is famously known across the world, this thing is, I believe, 79 feet long. And let me go down and check that real quick. Man, they have a lot of information on the B-17, man. They wrote a book. It's 74 feet long. This is 74 feet long. The B-17 Flying Fortress, which is considered a big bomber by many people, even still, this thing is only as big as a MiG-31 right there.
Oh, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy when you start getting into the scale stuff because you figure out how deceptive like camera imagery is and how differently sized everything is in real life. But it is pretty much largely the same missile in scale, size, and everything. They only shaved a few inches off of the Kinzel compared to an Iskander, and so to see that it really is just a slightly upgraded Iskander that came in brand new packaging and they were calling this thing the unstoppable missile, no wonder it failed. It hardly made any improvements on the Iskander's design. It hardly is even faster than the Iskander. It's only faster by about, I believe, a Mach and a half. And when you put that into scale of how fast a normal Iskander flies at its fastest speed, that's practically nothing. And so it's not really shocking to see that these guys were arrested. And the thing sucks.
That's what I was about to ask. I was about to ask that. So you say the guys should be arrested?
Well, I mean, yeah, they should be arrested. I don't even know why in the world anyone... And this is really like a whole like wide-scale thing. This is a massive scandal because, like, how in the hell did the Russian army not catch on to when this thing was being tested and the numbers were coming out? It was no better than an Iskander. I mean, you know, it was corruption on everyone's end. The guys in the army were being bribed by the guys who were designing the Kinzel to accept the missile, and so they took their money and accepted the missile. These guys under-delivered. It's not a hypersonic missile. It's hardly a hypersonic missile. It's hardly even not an Iskander. It just sucks. It's a terrible missile. And so we're starting to see that now, and the propaganda's falling apart. And now we can see that the Russians even knew the propaganda was going to fall apart so badly, they were already arresting the designers of this missile as far back as a year ago at this point to hold them accountable for what they already knew was an underperforming weapon. And this is nothing new to the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation. Every single thing they ever designed throughout their history was always an underperforming piece of garbage, all the way from the MiG-25 to the AA-20 steam locomotive, which was the largest one ever built in the world. to the Kinzhal, to the Su-27, anything they've made, it's always been known to be underperforming. So this is really nothing new. But it is funny to hear that they are arresting these people and trying to use them as a scapegoat for something they knew was a problem the entire time. So with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well. Honestly, if you wanted to arrest everyone involved, you would have to arrest Shoigu and everyone below him as well. So everyone in Russia should be arrested for this one. But, you know, it's not shocking to see. Shoigu! No не пропасна! But anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well. Kind of a long rabbit hole on that one, but I hope it was very enlightening about how badly the Russian arms industry or the Russian industry as a whole underperforms. And so with that, we are on to the next poll.
All right, and we are all out of poll questions. So we are moving on to our Super Chat questions. And up first, we have a very generous $100 Super Chat from none other than Psyops. And thank you very much, Psyops, for the support. And he has a Super Chat here that is on the border of being spicy. So it is going over to the Enforcer's DMs right now for a review.
I can read it on screen. I also got to thank you for the massive amount of support, Psyops. Let's see. And well, I can't read it off. I'm sitting here making sure that we can or can't read it off. Sadly, we can't read the whole thing off. But I will say, congratulations to them for their 5 years of marriage. And happy anniversary to Eli and Adam for y'all's wedding. Wedding anniversary. It's 5 years is an incredibly long time, and hopefully y'all have another 50 years or so. And so thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support, Sipes. I'm sorry we can't read the whole thing off, and so in its stay, we'll be making sure to address a live chat. But of course, I got to thank you so much once again, Sipes, for being a massive supporter of this channel and making this thing possible. You help us to make this thing ad-free and sponsor-free every single day we ever run this thing. And I got to thank you so much, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to do this as a job. We're completely uncompromising. And now that I say, whenever I say that line, I think it kind of comes across that if y'all didn't support us, we would run sponsors and ads. I'm uncompromising in the idea of never running sponsors or ads on these streams or the short videos. So really, the only thing that keeps this thing running, because if we didn't get any support, we would just eventually shrivel up and die. Well, at least as doing this as a job. And so I got to thank y'all so much for the support. I got to thank you, Sipes, as well, for the massive amount of support and helping this channel to keep on running, because without folks like you, this wouldn't be possible. And so with that, let's get a live chat.
And also, by the way, Sipes told me to show you the meme that he sent me on Discord. So it's in your DMs for you to review as well.
For me to review. Now this has got to be spicy. Let's see. So can you delete the super chat from above it real quick, so that way I can show it.
There.
All right, there we go. Now we're gonna throw up the Discord DM. 200,000 orcs. And many of y'all may know this picture. It's from that song where he goes, "Look at this photograph," and then he shows that. And then they changed it in the meme to look at this graph, and it has like a graph of something on it. And the graph says 200,000 orcs. And realize, Poodler, why it makes me laugh. Very nice. I like the meme. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Sipes, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, let's make sure to get to that live chat.
All right, and the live chat question is going to go to JC the Music Man, who says, do you think the nuclear threat is not a factor anymore since the Kinzhal is the delivery vehicle and can be shot down?
The Kinzhal is not the only delivery vehicle, so I would say that the nuclear threat is still existent. If the entire nuclear threat's dependent on whether they have a delivery system or not, the nuclear threat is still there. It will never go away, because they do have other kinds of missiles that are nuclear capable. Hell, they could really just load up a MiG-31 or any kind of Soviet or Russian aircraft with a small nuclear bomb and just fly it straight to its target and drop it there. It has been a part of Soviet and Russian Federation doctrine that if they enter a conventional war, tactical nukes will at least enter a conventional war with the West, or NATO for that matter. Tactical nukes would practically be used within the first few weeks of a conventional war with them. And so it is easy to say that they probably would still be able to drop nuclear weapons on Ukraine if they wanted to, even with the Kinzhal not really as operational or as effective as we really thought it was. Moving on from that, I would say that and you know, it really, that answer is kind of dependent on whether they have a delivery system. By and large, the nuclear threat is always there, but the thing is it really going to be followed through on? And the answer to that is not really. Even if the Kinzhal was an effective delivery system, you know, even if they do have an effective delivery system, the implications of using a nuclear weapon and the, I guess you could say, consequences of doing something like that largely ensure that they wouldn't. While Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear deterrent, they do have the United States guarantee that any nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons used within their borders will immediately lead to U.S. intervention, armed intervention in the war. And that's one thing that the Russians know is going to be an unwinnable fight. And so they'll never nuke Ukraine for that reason. But on the particular end of whether the nuclear threat is serious just if they have a delivery vehicle or not, even if the Kinzhal isn't a successful delivery system at all, they still have other delivery systems that they could use. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you once again for the mass amount of support, Sipes, and of course helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat goes to Tim Q, who puts in a $20 super chat, and thank you very much, Tim, for that support. He says, in that Russian rap song, it's actually not "What Can I Do?" It's "Vodki Naidu," meaning I'll find some vodka, but it is an intentional play on "What Can I Do?" from what I can tell.
Really? I think it's so much for the support, and they're getting sloshed. You know, I feel like, honestly, that's kind of a sad culture to live in, is that the Russian culture revolves around alcohol so much. They're in the middle of a war. They can't even stop drinking booze, and then they listen to songs about booze. It's seriously a massive problem, and it has been a cultural problem.
Would you go into the war on the Russian side sober?
Yeah, I mean, like, hell yeah, I would, because at least I'd live. You know, like, they're so drunk.
They don't even have weapons.
Listen, I'm saying this. If you were on the Russian side and you had to join the war, would you rather enter sober or drunk? If that's the way I'm looking at that answer, that question, my answer would be I'd rather go in sober than drunk. Because when you're sober, at least you may have a chance of surviving. You go in drunk, you're dead already. You're just waiting to die.
I don't know. If I was the Russians on their side with no weapons, knowing they're sending me out into the meat grinder, I sure wouldn't go in sober to it.
Man, I would, because at least I'd be smart enough to turn around and run.
I mean,
run. But anyways, I hope that addresses that kind of well. And also, thank you for sharing that with us about what those lyrics really were. And you know, another funny thing is that the Russians always talk about how much they hate America, yet their songs sound like 1990s U.S. American rap. You know, it's like, how in the world can you hate us that badly? Yet everything you'll do is a cheap imitation of what we do. You know, it's like, you gotta pick something. Like, go back to, like, Russian traditional music or something like that. But speaking of getting back to alcoholism has always been a serious problem in Russia, and it's been such a bad problem for such a long time that during the Russian Revolution, Lenin actually called vodka, or alcohol in general in Russia, a tool of the bourgeoisie that was used to control the Russian masses by making them so drunk and so inebriated they really couldn't do anything against you know, the lords and the royal family, the imperial family, whenever they wanted to do anything. And it's been a problem for that long, and pretty much, I mean, like, you know, while I'm not a supporter of Lenin or anything, he was kind of correct, because even during Stalin's reign, they pumped back the production of alcohol all the way back up to even above the imperial numbers that were being produced in the Russian Empire to make the Russian public as drunk as possible, so that way they couldn't realize what was going on around them. And it's really sad to think that their country works like that, is that alcohol is pretty much just used to numb them down to where their suffering is just nothing, because they're so drunk to not even realize it. But with that, I hope we addressed that one fairly well as well, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, but before we move right on into the frontline news.
All right, and the third and last one goes to Mr. E-Man, who puts in a very generous $42 super chat. Hey! And thank you so much for that support. He says it cost an estimated $10 million to maintain an ICBM, and do you think that Russian is actually spending that money correctly, or is the money redirecting that money?
And I thank you so much.
I think meant to say, are the Russians redirecting the money?
Yes, and I thank you so much for the support, Mr. E-Man. That helps us keep this channel running, and thank you so much for enjoying it enough to find it worthwhile to support. And to answer that question, I'll be honest with you, I don't think they're maintaining a lot of their nuclear weapons, or a lot of them wouldn't be up to spec. Everyone in the Russian army uses their position to funnel money out of the army and into their own pockets or the pockets of their friends. That has been a thing that's been known all the way back since Soviet times. And so I would not doubt it at all that a lot of their nuclear weapons are not up to the ability to be properly used. If we had to talk about intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are the largest ones and always the ones that people look at, even here in the United States, I would certainly say those are most likely not operational. Those are a money-making opportunity for the Russian commanders that'll be in charge of those silos with those missiles inside of them, and so they will make sure to find some way to skim some of that money off somewhere, somehow, and then redirect that somewhere else. So I have a pretty good feeling, Mr. E-Man, that they probably have not maintained their nuclear weapons well, and they're probably not that far away from going into a nuclear disaster. Speaking of which, I think I watched something a while ago. There was actually almost a nuclear disaster in Arkansas when a silo was filled with flammable gas, and there was an active nuclear warhead in there. Somehow it blew up and the warhead went flying off a couple of 100 yards away from the silo, but it didn't blow up. I forgot when that happened. It was like in the late 70s or early 80s, and I forgot the name of the incident. But maybe one day when we're going down a rabbit hole in the question segment, I'll find that for you all. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, Mr. E-Man, and thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support and helping this channel keep on running, because folks like you make this channel possible. And if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to do this. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we're now going to be moving on into the frontline news. And starting off in the Northeast, over the past 48 hours, you'll be surprised to see nothing's happened. As you can see, nothing has changed. And so now moving on into the videos, we got to see an M270 firing its rockets or missiles at the Russian positions. I like how the first second, it just turns into a fireball. And here's the clip. You see it firing its first missile. You now see it firing its second missile. Its third missile. Its fourth missile. I gotta tell you, I just love videos like these. There's not really a lot of action going on in them, but it's just great to see these massively impressive MLRSs in operation like this M270. Honestly, if I had to be completely honest with y'all, my preference of American MLRS, I actually like the M270 more than the M240 HIMARS. I think this thing is a little bit cooler in my opinion, one, because it's tracked, and it just looks neat. But anyways, it still has the exact same performance missile-wise as a HIMARS, and it is great to see that they do